psychology is like a new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behaviors so you won't click. No complicated code, just tried and true brain science at play. Social engineering for good, the best defense is in your mind today.
Welcome to Phishing for Answers. The opinions expressed here are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the views of their employers. Get ready, because the next live episode of Phishing for Answers is starting right now with your host, Joshua Krumbaugh, the CEO of Fish Firewall.
Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behavior so you won't click.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today we're lucky enough to have Phil Miller with us. Phil, why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Phil Miller. I currently work in information security at LPL Financial, servicing our advisors and helping align our business objectives and our information security strategy to help make their success evitable.
Awesome. So how'd you get into cybersecurity? Let's start there.
You know, it's weird. When I follow some people on LinkedIn, I share similar background of I didn't actually start in cyber directly. I kind of cross over from being a business analyst, working in data center operations, and really enjoyed learning about how things work, not just from a technical aspect, but from an operation standpoint. And how do you engage the systems with the humans on the other side, helping them to deliver their mission objectives. So I did a lot of work with the Navy for a few years, stemming from data center operations, and then doing more of some security packages called through risk management framework, and getting like authority that operates on the network. So right. So that's where I really got the interest, and then it kind of just molded into there. I think even when I was in college, one of the things I really enjoyed about information systems in itself, it isn't necessarily like how does the information system work, even though that kind of fascinated me. It was more so how can I work with information systems and humans at the same time. I really enjoyed talking to people, and that's where I knew I really performed and did well, not just with others, but with myself. I enjoyed what I did. And so I kind of just navigated into roles that allowed me to be more consultative and to be able to understand what they wanted to achieve, what their pain points were, what their visions were and strategies were, and then translate that into kind of a roadmap that built out these information systems or kind of aligned these information systems within their organization to deliver on these goals, visions, and objectives that they had.
Okay, very cool. I think we need, a lot of people in cybersecurity, and it's just my opinion, but it really just seemed to me that a lot of people really did come up through the more technical paths. And to have those people with the, more of the passion for the human side, the human element, I think that's incredibly important because there's a lot of technical to cybersecurity, but I personally believe that there is far more soft skills, far more human aspect or human element in cybersecurity than there is technical. And and you look at the breaches. Where do they always come from? It's human error, I personally argue that no matter what statistics they put out there, whether it's 90% or 95%, that they're all wrong. And 100% of breaches start with human error. It's just, is it a fish or is it a developer writing bad code? But it's still human error.
I would say that's a strong argument to make. Um, I would put it more emphasis on not just the human error aspect of it, because there are some savvy nation state actors out there So there are, I would say though, in the ways that I have seen through the news over the last year or 2 years, that a system is breached, right, or a network is hacked. Excuse me. Um, I've seen very few sophisticated ways that didn't require exploiting some aspect of human error, where you just were able to get into the system like not through brute force, but like just sheer genius smarts, like you just bend code to your will, and that you made it sing the tune you wanted to, the system.
But
There have
what's
been.
that example of this 0 day where I like what you said, bend code to their will. But let's use this example. Almost every 0 day that I've ever seen relies and exploits default configurations. So if you just simply harden your systems, it will block most of even those 0 days.
True.
Has that not been your experience as well? And
I,
and that's the whole reason behind RMF, right?
Right, right. And that's where I was going with it. Where, yeah, for the most part, most of these breaches, even the 0 days, exploit some fundamental aspect of security that hasn't really been touched upon.
Yeah,
And because in organizations, when you're trying to always come up with a new thing, right? You're all about the shareholder stock price, right? So you're
yeah,
trying to deliver the new product, right? You're trying to be so cutting edge. Well, what typically happens is like having that star team. You're so good out there, you think you're so great at what you're trying to do that you kind of forget about the basics at times, and what really made you great to begin with. And we're turning those foundations. So, like something
yeah,
as simple as enabling an MFA by default. How many times have you seen an entity out there get hacked because they had default password set up, or they had
yeah.
just a username and password set up with no MFA, right? Or they had test accounts out there that had no MFA, right? Or they're not
Or a
rotating.
contractor account that
Exactly.
hasn't been touched in 5 years, but because it's a contractor that's still technically active, it's still out there. And what happens with those accounts that haven't been touched in 5 years? Well, the passwords are 5 years old too.
Exactly. Or you hand, a part of the keys of the kingdom to an intern, and the intern sets a
Yeah,
intern generic password. So I know the touch is big about passwords, but like for financial services industry, one of the biggest threats out there, again, and it's basic, is account takeovers, and as a result of poor credential management, right? Poor identity and access management. So, and then you could go into social engineering, which in cybersecurity, people are great at partially out each type of threat on its unique status. But a lot of it is just from the basis of social engineering, whether it's business email compromise, right?
yeah,
Whether it's you get malware on your PC, whether it's a phone call into your help desk system, whatever the case may be. It's just a style of social engineering that comes about from it.
yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. How do we get the users to not fall for these social engineering attacks?
It's repetition and training. I did it a while back, a couple years ago. I joined the team at where I work at doing a security awareness training for some users we deemed potentially at risk, just because of their proximity and closeness with working with executives. So,
Fair.
and it wasn't to say like they weren't good at their job. It was just like, hey, if there
The
is a
nature of
potential
their job put
threat
them at
out
high
there,
risk. Yeah,
right? So, and these were business users, all right. They weren't dedicated tech users like developers and whatnot that
yeah,
our company does training for now and whatnot. But we're sitting there and we're going through kind of like a cyber hygiene training, and then what business email compromise is and what to look for. And all these individuals were spot on in their knowledge of what business email compromise was and how to spot something that seemed suspicious. I wouldn't say it's almost better than me, but they were really good. Like they would give me a run for my money.
yeah.
So I don't think it's like anything new in what we can deliver other than repetition, and then
Keeping it
encouraging
front of mind
en-
so that it's not.
encourage exactly, and then encouraging individuals not to get complacent. I think
Yeah.
that's where a major pitfall
I'm
happens.
going to add a couple of other little, I guess, bits to that. Repetition, I couldn't agree more. I think that we've got to move away from this once a year or 4 times a year, boring, long format training. Number one, even if it works, the user is only going to retain just a small percentage of it. It's the nature of binge anything. You can go binge watch your favorite television show, or a brand new series. Maybe go binge watch the new season or whatever. You're not going to remember almost any of it, and you can come back 6 months later and watch it again almost like it's new. And that's with something that you really enjoy. So when you take something like security awareness that people don't enjoy, binge training just simply doesn't work. And there's actually quite a few academic studies that have come out recently where they've checked, they've done that, annual training. They've even done the quarterly training, and they ran phishing simulations before and then again after. And they found that there was little to no improvement, and in some cases, they actually were more susceptible after the training. And so I do think that you know frequent and bite size is really important. And that's how you get that repetition. And I don't think it has to take more time. I just think it needs to be done from a different perspective.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think the other thing that people really appreciate in the corporate workplace is incentivification.
Yeah, I agree.
What are they going to be incentivized by to do this, to prioritize your training, right? Especially if it takes longer than like a couple minutes. What are they going to do to prioritize your training over that important memo that they have to get out for their executive, or that important PowerPoint deck that they need to get together for Friday's presentation? Don't let it be later in the week and they have a Monday's presentation. They need to get something done, right?
Yeah.
So it's that incentivization. And I think one of the things I saw one of the big tech firms recently put out, because they were getting hit with kind of not being as secure as they should be, is they baked it into the performance evaluation process. Doesn't have to be a huge component of it, but something that well known that says, hey, what have you done over this last rating period to help push the security initiatives of the organization to make our products more safe and secure, right? And that could be something as simple as, hey, we were able to ship products out with less vulnerable defects. And it doesn't mean they don't have any defects, but
Yeah.
they, instead
Less.
of having 60 defects, now you only have 45, right? So you're showing that burn down. Or with the phishing, hey, we we're able to report more suspicious emails or whatever the case may be to the SOC. Or hey,
Yeah.
we were evaluating some vendors, but something seemed off, so we integrated some of our security personnel, or we integrated some more of our sourcing and procurement personnel to continue to do some background checks, whatever the case may be. But having it as part of that performance evaluation process, and again, doesn't need to be a core component of it, but it needs to be there where it's its own set aside box that says, what have you done to help continue to build the organization towards its goals?
I like that. I think we got to be careful with it. But before I go into any of my opinions there, I'm curious what your perspective is on the age-old question, carrot versus stick. What's more effective, and what should we be using more?
You know, every time I hear that question or read it, I think of those. I may get the name of it, but it's those scales like you see in legal offices, where like
Oh
it
yeah,
has
the
the
scales of
weight of
justice.
the, yeah, the scales of justice. So it's the weighted balance. I do prefer a balanced approach. I don't like all just carrot, because it just feels like more patronizing that aspect. Like, come on, you can do it. You could get this, and then when whatever you promise them doesn't come to fruition, then you kind of lose the whole aspect of your initiative you're trying to push. And I also don't like just all stick, where you're just beating someone over the head all day. Like it just turns you off. You wouldn't listen to it to anybody outside of work. You definitely aren't going to listen to that type of method inside of work. Um, I do believe in cause and consequence can be both positive and negative. So I do think you need a little bit of both. You need that incentivization that says, hey, you did something great, right? And that threshold of great could be determined by the organization and whatever you want to pit with that. Like, hey, here's an extra PTO day, here's extra bonus, here's extra time off here, whatever the case may be, right? Here's, some like a soda or some trinket little gift. And then, consequence, negative consequence. Hey, we see that you're running a lot of default passwords in the environment. What we need to be able to do is change all those. If we see this occurring again, maybe go through some re-education training. Okay, maybe we say, hey, we revoke your access to these systems for a little bit because you're showing that you're at risk individual with the default passwords you're setting. Like, I'm making stuff up off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but there does need to be that balanced approach. And in each side, though, you have to remember that you're not dealing with systems, even though this the systems where you're finding the vulnerable weaknesses in because of this person's actions. You're dealing with people on the other side. And so it's that psychology aspect of how do I keep encouraging the good behavior without seeming overly patronizing, right? And seeming like they're just doing it because I'm telling them to do it, and vice versa. How do I re-encourage positive behavior from negative behavior with the same thing without being overly patronizing and making them feel like they're just doing it so they don't get in trouble, right? How do I make this a genuine need and want and desire in themselves? And sometimes that takes getting to know those individual people. And it's hard to do in a corporate workplace because you're so busy. You might have 100 employees. You don't have time to get to know the nuances of every single person every single day to
Yeah.
get them to do the right thing. But from a well enough aspect, right? 80% coverage or plus of, hey, how can we get to know our employees well enough to encourage the good behaviors that we want to see?
So I mostly agree. I like to I'm very much a fan of carrots. But some of the things that you mentioned as sticks, I don't necessarily think are sticks. I think they're mitigating controls that have to be put in place because somebody has demonstrated a certain amount of risk. And I do think we should have mitigating controls. If we've got that chronic clicker that clicks on half of the phishing simulations that we send out, or has already clicked on 5 this year, or whatever it happens to be, right? That user's demonstrated a lot of risk. So it just stands to reason that they're probably clicking on malicious emails getting into their inbox too. So we know that if, out of everybody in our population, these, 5 people or 10 people are the most likely to get us malware. Well, maybe we restrict some of their access if they have privileged access. Maybe that's a little less privileged for a minute while they work on their risk, or maybe we segment their machines off onto an isolated network that has more security. There's a lot of things like that I think that we can and should be doing, because to me, the problem of social engineering is a really, it's a big threat, and you're not going to solve it in any one area. So I think you got to solve it in a couple ways. You try to stop as much social engineering attacks as possible from ever getting to your users, but you also have to train them to make sure that they fall for as few of them as possible. And I feel like that stick, maybe, or just really that's final leg is those mitigating controls. And I don't think it necessarily has to be a stick, because I think it can go both ways. The really cool thing about tying mitigating controls to people that have demonstrated a higher level of risk is that, in theory, you can go the opposite direction with that too, and lighten controls for people that have demonstrated a great deal of cybersecurity. And so I think that there's, I don't know, a little bit of a balancing act. But I really do think that carrot always wins out over stick in some of these really heavily punitive practices, like 3 strikes and you're out. I just think that it's antiquated and it won't last long. Well,
When you
last long.
say 3 strikes and you're out, like out as in you're let
Like
go
fired.
out.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's still
yeah,
a
that's
very
what I thought.
common practice where, and particularly in the financial sector, where you'll see, these 3 strikes policies where if they click on 3 fish, they're gone.
You know, that's given today's talent shortages, not just in cyber, but across
A really
across
good
sectors.
reason.
Um, you know, I would say taking that approach, I would definitely consider that to be a lot more harsher than I would consider to be a stick. Like for me, I pit those options as if you really had to cross a threshold, not just three strikes, but you really had to be doing quite a few things to get to that aspect. And I turn it over to HR and let them go through their processes with that and management and leadership. But no, my mind goes back to my days in military training where it's if you have a 6-man team and you like find an innocuous reason to down one man, well now your overall strength has been diluted. And
Yeah.
don't let that one man actually be like a huge like source of energy for the rest of the team, that man or woman, then you're really down and diluted, right? So dropping people for something that small in nature, I don't think is something that
Yeah, you don't
should
go into the
be
battle with
should be
the
yeah,
army
should be
you want,
practiced.
you go into battle with the army you have.
And I also think too, it kind of sends the wrong message to everybody else where everyone's like, oh man, if I don't get this right, I'm gonna get let go. Where I learned the best sometimes if you really want to be strong in that nature, and I don't advocate for it, but if you really want to be to the point of that strong, get your point across, you take what people find to be most what they like the most and typically that comes down to bonus time where you're like hey here's your performance. That's why I say for training you tie it into people's performance evaluations. Hey, so we've seen over the last year, performance year, you did well in these areas, but hey, within your security awareness and training, you kind of were in the negative a bit with kind of your performance on the click rates. You kind of here's like our threshold rating aspect. You're kind of been in the red. We gave you opportunities kind of um, fix that and do something new training and give you more opportunities, but you didn't really fix it. As such, this takes a 5% hit off your bonus, or this takes 10% hit off your bonus. Like those messagings actually hit harder over the long run. Doesn't get rid of that key person on your team or that critical person on your team, but it still does send a message of what I was saying before, cause and consequence.
Well, and I don't think it even has to be any real penalty. I think too often we integrate in places that the employees don't pay attention. So an example I'll give you is we may put a cybersecurity poster up in the break room, or we put some cybersecurity message in the newsletter. And that's great. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. But I think to your point about tying it to their performance, another little thing you can do is just put that cybersecurity reminder on their pay stub. Help us protect everyone's paychecks, be secure, whatever it happens to be, right? It's tying it back to the fiscal aspect of it, which I think helps make it real for people.
It does. It does. I also build off of that. If your company has like a internet start page where you jump on the internet and it brings you like your splash page of whatever's going on in your
Yeah.
organization, you can have messaging posted there. I've
Yeah.
seen that done before.
I see
And
people
then
put desktop backgrounds. Big fan of desktop backgrounds because that's what you're staring at. Well, maybe not
all
all
the
day,
time.
but every time you lock your computer, that's what you see. So, that
Yep.
lock screen is valuable. But I think we should, really be looking to integrate everywhere. If you have elevators that have a television, put security awareness videos on there. If you
Yep.
have the intranet, make sure that the homepage that you get as much of that real estate on the homepage as you possibly can. I mean, and I think that just needs to be an ongoing thing where you find any place you possibly can and you get creative, just like the advertisers and the marketers do. One of my so I went to school for marketing. I guess I planned to go for the software development. Got there, the dean of the marketing school found me. I don't know, coerced me into going into marketing somehow. But that aside, I went to school for marketing, and it's always stuck with me as I got into cybersecurity. And I think that we forget or maybe not even forget. Maybe we just don't even think to bring marketing into what we're doing in the first place. But there's a lot of really important lessons. At the very beginning, you said repetition. Well, that was one of the first things that I learned about in marketing was this thing called spaced repetition, and how if I can deliver my message in little bite-sized chunks, the smaller the better, at a high frequency, that I would get really good retention. And this is the foundation of marketing. It's how do we influence people's thinking, which ultimately leads to how do we influence their decision making, and how do we influence their behaviors and their actions. And so what are we trying to do in cybersecurity? Well, it's the same thing. We want to influence their thinking, we want to influence their actions, and we want to impact them at as much of a subconscious level as a conscious level, and often even more sometimes on the subconscious level than the conscious. And so there's a lot we can learn from marketing, I think, to that regard. And you look at our training, it's on the same path that marketing it used to be on. When I was a kid, commercials were a minute long, or 30 seconds, but now they're 30 seconds max. More often they're 15 seconds or 10 seconds or 5 seconds. And I know at my company, that's the direction that we've gone, is to true micro training. Well, we call TikTok style training, but it's our shortest videos are 5 seconds in length, and our longest are 60. And I think that that's how we can drive better results and actually get people to care. The other part of marketing, though, was simplifying the message. And that's another thing that I think we get wrong terribly as well. And it's not on purpose, but we take very technical people and we ask them to teach non-technical people about cybersecurity. And well, technical people do what technical people do, and they get into the weeds. But I think that for the end user, it's not here's how you check headers, or even think before you click, or even hover. It's trust your gut. And we got to really think about what those core messaging points that we want to get through to our users are. And if we can only get through 3 to 5 a year, what do we want them to be?
I agree with a lot of that, especially the part about simplifying the message and integration. One of the awesome things I've seen occur in the past is when you have those corporate town halls that everyone has to attend. We get to see the executives and you talk about the company's mission and values and strategic direction. I've I've seen just a quick spot, nothing long or drawn out, but a quick spot on the importance of cybersecurity and how it's helping an organization make their clients successful, and how that is helping to grow and spur the innovation and achieve the OKRs of the organization itself. And just that little bit, all of a sudden, it's like becomes that stressing priority in people's minds subconsciously, where it's like, well, did you make sure you didn't do the fish? Are you doing this right? When I'm getting feedback like that from business units, I'm like, wow, like
That
the
is, yeah, that's awesome.
it is, and it's definitely eye opening to your point of, you don't need that over technical pitch about why cybersecurity is important. And most people nowadays know about cybersecurity. It's not
Yeah.
like some hidden concept maybe 15, 20 years ago where
They've
people are like,
watched the
what
news
is
too.
that?
They
Well,
heard about NVM just like the rest of us.
exactly. So it is that strong marketing arm of cybersecurity of how do you get that message out there? How do you do it with enough high fidelity and high frequency where it's attention grabbing and it holds for a prolonged period of time. And then you just kind of just wash, rinse, and repeat. Do it again and again
Yeah.
and again. And then you can kind of something that I was in a Mandiant talk a couple weeks ago. Something that was pretty cool was you can tweak your security awareness training based off what insights you're getting through your threat intelligence team. So that way, it's always relevant to the active threats or
Yeah.
perceptible threats that the firm's facing. So you have your generic, maybe once a year cyber hygiene training, cyber security awareness month, but throughout the rest of the year, all of it was just very month over month based on what the their intel team is. And you just do a little tweak here, a little tweak there, right? Whether it could be, hey, we're experiencing high DDoS events, or hey, we're looking at potential ransomware, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be
I even
something
think the phishing simulations that you're running, is
exactly.
it mostly authority impersonation, or is it reciprocity, or is it urgency? What are we being hit with the most right now? Because I think that threat intelligence should feed every aspect of what you're doing, from your program itself. So what are we prioritizing in terms of our initiative, down to when we're doing our security awareness training, what are we teaching people about? And that could even be technical training to your SOC people. I mean, because it's the SOC team needs training, or that continuous training, just the same as everyone else. The
Yeah,
difference is they don't need to hear the basics. They need to hear about the latest MITRE ATT&CK framework tactic that maybe they haven't had a chance to read about yet.
exactly. So, um,
So I like it. And I think one thing that's always stuck with me in my career was this CEO that I met, who was the CEO of a New York City hedge fund, and very, very aggressive personality. And he says, my people's time is worth, this much money an hour, which is the reason you're not spending more than 1 hour of their time a year. And I'm just, the I guess red teamer at the time, doing the readout. And initially I'm thinking, man, 1 hour a year. Well, you're already failing every single social engineering test that we're doing. You've been doing 1 hour a year. It's not working. So clearly you need to consider doing more training. But then as I thought about it more, I realized that 1 hour was maybe more than I had thought about it, or given it credit for being. And what I mean by that was, if I take 1 hour of your time just in one chunk, 1 hour isn't much time. But if I take 30 seconds of your time each time I talk to you, now all of a sudden 1 hour puts me in front of you talking about cybersecurity twice a week, every week of the year. And I'm still not even at a full hour. And so that, to me, has always really stuck with me, because you can do a lot with an hour, but if you try and cram it into once a year, or even 4 times a year, you're not going to get much value out of it. But the more you can break it up, the more value you can get from it.
agreed. And that's where I point to providing high fidelity training. It's the quantity over, or I would say it's the quality
Quality.
over the quantity. Yeah.
No,
um,
that's how we used to do it, Phil.
right. Right. But it's that high impact training where you get in, you take care of it in a commercial spot, right? 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and you just have your 3 points. Maybe you
Yeah.
only have two, depending on what's going on. But the messaging will stick. And then if you decide to market it in a creative manner, it doesn't need to be something overly funny or new, but just something that like sticks and relevant for the organization. How many inside jokes does a company have because something happens inside those walls where only the employees know about it? Where it's like it's just being able to understand and know about that. Say if you have a huge client you just won, or you just made it, got a huge new merchant acquisition, you can literally play on the relevancy of the current events within the organization to continue to drive and bolster your security awareness training and make it valuable for people without, to your point, make it some drawn out event where it's wasting people's time.
There's other things I think you can do to make it valuable too. One of my favorite tactics, and it's a little manipulative, but I guess when I was a red teamer, I found out that I was really good at social engineering. No joke, my very first physical assessment, able to talk my way into a bank vault, and it kept going on like that. But so when I decided that I wanted to create a solution to actually mitigate this threat and not just put a band-aid on it, I really approached it from the perspective of how do we use social engineering as a tool for good, and it's really mostly behavioral science and a lot of psychology. But what I found interesting was that there's all these little things that you can do that get the employee to think differently on inadvertently. And the greatest example is you give them homework. So I give them a tip about how they're targeting, children on Roblox, or how they're targeting elderly people. And I send them home and I tell them to go teach their kids about it, or to go teach their elderly parents about it. And what's really cool is that when they do that, they become the expert at home, and it changes their position at home and forces them, because they're now the expert at home, to become that expert. And so it's this, I don't know, cool little tactic to get people to completely have a mental shift in how they approach things. And not only that, but because they're taking it home now, it's added value, because they care more about, their parents not getting scammed, or their children not getting, creeped on, than they do about the company, making their profit goals this quarter, right? And so that's another way I think we can tap into that. And another one is, people don't believe things are real. And so, as opposed to telling them about things happening in the world, having, when, let's say, Joe from accounting reports this, attack that, or this spearfish that hit him, well, we have Joe go tell the rest of the company about what targeted him, because it makes it real, because it's not somebody else, now it's their coworker.
Yep, it's that personalized relevance to them.
Yeah.
Gives them
But
a
it's
sense
little
of
things
wanting
like
to get
that
into it.
that get them to open up and see cybersecurity as something that is maybe not so intimidating.
I think for most people, at least present day that I interact with, they don't find security in itself intimidating. I think it's overwhelming with how many alerts or policies they may have to adhere and follow to, in addition to everything else going on in their role.
See that?
Um, so it's the simplification of it that really gets in there in the midst of like all that other chaos and noise that they have going on. Um, but I do think from a marketing aspect, it's that advertising of why is this important to you? Why is this relevant to you? And
Yeah.
finding where that hits home at. Everyone, for the most part, uses social media. Everyone, for the most part, pretty much watches TV. Everyone, for the most part, uses some form of mobile app for communication or payments, right? So you have the ability to not just train on here's what the threats the company is facing, but hey, what are the known threats that regular users on their day-to-day lives are experiencing, and what are the things that you can kind of watch out from, and take that really cool technical concept or that cool new technical, like really technical threat that you found that is highly relevant, but be able to water it down in context so that it's easy to inject your messaging to the user. So to your point, they can go home, they can talk to their families about it. They can become that expert. They can be able to come back and work, build off of what they learned, what they discussed, and also what you've taught in the corporate setting, and become even better, like sentry guards for the organization.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Overwhelmed is a much better term for the way they feel. I do think Hollywood does us no good or no favors, because Hollywood makes cybersecurity out to be this thing that only a genius can understand. And while it's really cool for our egos, it's maybe not the best for when the users are looking at it, because they just go into it with this bias that's largely created by Hollywood.
Yeah, I've heard some of that too. I've gone on a few calls with some business users and been told, "I know what security is, and there's nothing here for it." So definitely get those opinions, strong opinions.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny when you do too. Well, so we are running low on time here. So do you have any sort of final bits of advice? Or actually, I think before we get there, we were talking beforehand about pet peeves, and why don't you share that your passion, or maybe not pet peeve, but more passion in cybersecurity?
I'll start off with the pet peeve and go to the passion because it flows right into one another. Um, and it's not just pertinent to cybersecurity actually, but everyone can probably experience this over at least the last 3 to 4 years, right? It's really hard to attract or retain talent. It's hard for people to get
Yeah,
out there and find a role, not just a role they love, but just right now find a role. And so once you get into organization, you're working within cybersecurity, particularly cybersecurity, right? One of the frustration things is being typecasted based off what someone's opinion is of you rather than what you're capable of doing. Um, a lot of people have grown up, a lot of people I follow and learn from have grown up not in cybersecurity, but in a field adjacent to cybersecurity, or sometimes in a completely unrelated field, marketing, and have jumped into cyber based off their found passions and have explored and learned, and they've had people there to help and train them. But sometimes I feel like there's this uh, I guess thought out there of I don't need to help train the next people up, right? Either I'm too busy or it's not important or whatever the case may be. They should just figure it out on their own.
yeah.
um Typecasting talent without really giving people the ability to learn and grow. Now if they're making mistakes, that's one thing, but if they're actively trying, they're delivering, just typecasting them because, oh, you need them to do this, so that that's all they're going to do, isn't isn't uh isn't efficient, and it isn't going to help and spur the longevity of your organization at all,
And
right?
they're
If
probably not gonna stay long term either if there's no opportunity to learn new things and expand their skills.
Exactly, and a lot of people that I know of enjoy being feeling like they're being mentally put in a box
Yeah.
by people.
And we
It's
all
just
need a challenge, particularly cybersecurity professionals, but I think it's
exactly.
everyone, craves that challenge once in a while.
Agree. And so my passion from that is twofold. One is advocating for yourself. Nobody speaks better for yourself than yourself, but also being able to advocate for others. Sometimes there's just individuals out there that just don't have the words or they don't have the
They
positioning
just
in the
don't know how to
organization.
advocate for
Uh,
themselves.
exactly. And that goes a long way. And then the other one is maintaining positivity. Right? If cybersecurity can be a lot of doom and gloom, just in the nature of
I
how
don't know
he
what you're
works,
talking about. It's not like the SEC made a law that we could go to jail or anything.
right? But how do you work through that? I guess burden, right? That constant looming sense of like I have this burden over my head. How do you still maintain that positivity? How do you be able to have that confidence that the team is working well, that you are working well, that something happens, the defenses you have in place will work well? Doesn't mean everything's gonna be perfect, doesn't mean bad things won't happen, but how do you maintain that positivity? Because that positivity is a shining light for others. And you'll notice there's just an overall change in demeanor with those that are on your team when you have the ability to advocate well, be positive, and really put things in perspective on, okay, how do we work through this in a meaningful way that gives us the positive results that we're looking for?
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that is I think a lot of people in our industry try to treat it like it's binary. And what I mean by that is, like there's a simple on or off. Either we're hacked or we're not hacked. And the reality is there's an acceptable amount of risk in any organization, and we're not mitigating it, making sure that there's no possible way anything could ever happen. We're mitigating it down to an acceptable amount of risk, and to me that is, well, not even to me, this is shamelessly stolen, well, not stolen because I'm giving him credit, but from Win Schwartau in his book Analog Security, it talks about how it's really more of driving as close to ones or as close to zeros as possible, but it's not so black and white.
Agree. It's definitely more of a fluid conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And if you've got a system that is so secure could never be hacked, you've got a system that's not very user friendly either. So
Agreed. Agreed again.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time today. And it's been a fabulous episode. I really appreciate you joining us. And for those of you joining remotely, we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you and have a great day.